A single father working as a janitor saved a $300 million deal by breaking every rule, and was fired for it. But what he discovered in that meeting didn't just save the company, it changed his entire life. This is the story of Ethan Cole, the invisible man who became undeniable. Stay until the end to see how it all unfolds. And don't forget to hit like and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. Part 2. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting their cold glow across the marble floors of the Vance Industries headquarters. It was 11:47 p.m., and Ethan Cole pushed his cleaning cart down the 42nd floor hallway with the same quiet rhythm he'd maintained for 3 years. His reflection in the floor-length windows showed a man who'd learned to disappear. Average height, worn jacket over his janitor's uniform, dark hair that needed cutting, and eyes that noticed everything while pretending to see nothing. Most people looked through him. That was fine. He preferred it that way. The cart's wheels squeaked softly as he moved past the executive suites, each one a monument to success he'd never touch. Inside his pocket, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, careful not to let his damp cleaning gloves touch the screen. "Dad, I can't sleep. When are you coming home?" Sophie. 7 years old, staying with Mrs. Chen next door like she did every night. Ethan's chest tightened the way it always did when he thought about her waiting up for him. "Soon, sweetheart. Close your eyes and think about pancakes. We'll make them in the morning. With chocolate chips, with whatever you want." He pocketed the phone and kept moving. The truth was he wouldn't be home until after 2 a.m. The truth was Sophie would be asleep by then, and he'd stand in her doorway watching her breathe, wondering if she'd remember these years differently than he did. The truth was the $73,000 in medical debt from her mother's final year wasn't going anywhere, and this job, invisible, thankless, steady, was all that stood between them and the kind of poverty that swallowed people whole. Ethan reached the conference room at the end of the hall. Through the glass walls, he could see the aftermath of another late meeting. Coffee cups ringed with brown stains, papers scattered across the long table, someone's forgotten blazer draped over a chair. He swiped his access card and stepped inside. The room still smelled like expensive cologne and tension. He'd cleaned this room 1,000 times, but tonight something felt different. The papers on the table weren't the usual corporate reports. They were covered in dense text, multiple languages, red-lined sections that suggested desperate negotiations. He shouldn't look. Looking was how invisible people became visible for all the wrong reasons. But Ethan had never been good at should. His eyes caught a header in Mandarin, then Portuguese. Then, his hand stilled on the coffee cup he'd been reaching for, a clause in Vietnamese that made his stomach drop. He knew that phrasing. He'd heard it before years ago, in a market in Hanoi where a vendor had tried to slip a fraudulent fee into a simple transaction. The words looked innocent if you didn't understand the layers beneath them. But Ethan understood layers. He'd spent 6 years moving through countries most people couldn't find on a map, working odd jobs, sleeping in hostels, learning languages the way other people learned to breathe. That was before Sophie, before everything changed. He set down the coffee cup and picked up the document, breaking another rule he'd never broken before. His eyes moved faster now, catching phrases in German, Arabic, Mandarin again, each one hiding something the English translation didn't quite capture. "What the hell are you doing?" Ethan spun around. A woman stood in the doorway, early 30s, dark suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent, eyes that could freeze water. Area Vance. He'd seen her before, always moving fast, always 3 steps ahead of everyone around her, always carrying the weight of the building on her shoulders without letting it show. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vance, I was just reading confidential documents?" Her voice was sharp enough to cut. "Do you have any idea what those papers are worth?" "No, ma'am." He set the document down carefully, exactly where he'd found it. "I apologize. I'll go." "Wait." Something in her expression shifted, just slightly. "You were reading them, not just looking, reading." Ethan said nothing. Invisible people didn't explain themselves. Arya stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor. "The Mandarin section. What does it say?" This was a test, or a trap. Probably both. Don't lie to me." She picked up the document he'd been holding. "I watched your eyes. You weren't just scanning, you were comprehending. So tell me what it says." The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. "It says the pricing structure is adjustable based on market conditions," Ethan said quietly. "But the Chinese phrasing suggests those adjustments would be unilateral. Only one side controls the changes." Arya's eyes narrowed. "And the Vietnamese clause?" "It's a modification clause disguised as standard legal language. If the Portuguese terms conflict with the Vietnamese terms, the Vietnamese version takes precedence, but only in the event of—" He paused, translating in his head, "in the event of unforeseen market restructuring, which isn't defined anywhere." Jesus Christ. Arya set the document down like it had burned her. She looked at Ethan differently now, and he hated it. Being seen was dangerous. "Who are you?" "Ethan Cole, night maintenance." "That's not what I mean." She gestured at the papers. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Here and there." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got, ma'am." They stared at each other across the conference table. Outside the windows, the city sprawled in every direction, millions of lights marking millions of lives, each one fighting their own invisible battles. Arya's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and whatever she saw there made her jaw tighten. "I have to go, but this conversation isn't over." "Yes, ma'am." She started toward the door, then stopped. "Those documents, what you just told me, can I trust you to keep your mouth shut about it?" "I've been keeping my mouth shut for 3 years, Ms. Vance. I'm pretty good at it." Something that might have been a smile flickered across her face. Then she was gone, leaving Ethan alone with the papers and the terrible certainty that he'd just made everything more complicated. He finished cleaning the conference room in record time and moved on to the next floor, but his mind stayed behind, picking apart what he'd seen. The deal those documents represented was massive. Hundreds of millions of dollars, partnerships spanning multiple countries, the kind of negotiation that could build empires or destroy them. And somewhere in the fine print, hidden behind language barriers and cultural nuances, someone had buried a knife. At 1:15 a.m., Ethan clocked out and took the service elevator down to the lobby. The security guard, Marcus, who'd worked nights even longer than Ethan, nodded as he passed. "Long shift?" "They're all long, Marcus." "Truth." Marcus went back to his crossword puzzle. "Hey, your kid doing better? You mentioned she had that cold." "Yeah, she's good. Thanks for asking." Outside, the October air bit through his jacket. Ethan walked 3 blocks to the bus stop and waited with 2 other night workers who looked as tired as he felt. His phone buzzed again. "Still awake?" "Mrs. Chen. She finally went down around midnight, asked me to tell you she loves you 3,000. Ethan smiled despite everything. Sophie's favorite movie. "Tell her I love her 3,001. The bus arrived 40 minutes later, half empty and smelling like disinfectant. Ethan took a window seat and watched the city slide past. Somewhere up there, in one of those towers, Arya Vance was probably still working. Probably worrying about the deal he'd accidentally glimpsed. Probably forgetting he existed. That was fine. That was better. But when he finally made it home at 2:34 a.m. and stood in Sophie's doorway watching her sleep, her small chest rising and falling, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, he thought about those documents again, about the trap someone had laid, about how easy it would be for good people to walk right into it without ever knowing. Not your problem, he told himself. You've got enough problems. He pulled Sophie's door mostly closed and headed to his own room, peeling off his work clothes and falling onto a mattress that had seen better years. Sleep came fast, the way it always did after a 12-hour shift. But his dreams were full of languages colliding, meanings shifting, and Arya Vance's voice asking, "Who are you?" And the next morning, Ethan made pancakes with chocolate chips, while Sophie told him about a girl at school who could do a handstand for 30 seconds. "Can you do a handstand, Dad?" "Not anymore, kiddo. I'm too old." "You're not old, you're only 30. Tell that to my back." Sophie giggled and drowned her pancakes in syrup. Morning light streamed through their apartment's single window, turning her hair golden. She looked so much like her mother in these moments that it hurt. "Dad, are you okay?" Ethan blinked. "Yeah, sorry, just tired." "You're always tired." "That's what happens when you stay up late making pancakes." She smiled, but there was something too adult in her eyes, too much understanding for a 7-year-old. She knew things were hard. She knew Dad worked nights and slept days and sometimes looked at bills with the expression people got when they were drowning. After breakfast, Ethan walked Sophie to school, 6 blocks through a neighborhood that was slowly being pushed out by development. The rent was going up again next month. He'd gotten the notice yesterday and hadn't figured out how to tell her yet. "See you after school, Sophie said at the gate. "See you after school." She hugged him tight, then ran off to join her friends. Ethan watched until she disappeared inside, then headed home to sleep until his shift started again. But sleep didn't come. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Arya Vance and those documents, and the way she'd looked at him when he'd explained the hidden clauses, like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve, like he was something other than furniture, dangerous, all of it. At 4 p.m., his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Cole? This is Jennifer Park from Vance Industries, HR. Miss Vance would like to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Will you be available?" Ethan's heart kicked against his ribs. "I work nights, ma'am. I'm usually asleep at 2 p.m. Miss Vance is aware she's asking for an exception. This is regarding a matter of some urgency." "What kind of matter?" "She'll explain when you meet. Can I confirm you for 2 p.m. tomorrow?" Every instinct Ethan had screamed at him to say no, to keep his head down, to stay invisible. "Yes, ma'am. I'll be there." "Excellent. 42nd floor, main conference room. Have a good day, Mr. Cole." The line went dead. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, phone still in his hand, and tried to convince himself he hadn't just made the biggest mistake of his life. The next day, Ethan stood outside the 42nd floor conference room at exactly 2 p.m., wearing the only button-down shirt he owned that didn't have a cleaning company logo on it. Through the glass walls, he could see Arya Vance talking with 2 other people, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit and a younger woman with sharp features and sharper eyes. Arya saw him and gestured him in. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming." She didn't offer to shake hands. "This is Richard Delacroix, our chief legal officer, and Maya Santos, head of international development." Both of them looked at Ethan like he was something that had crawled out of the ventilation system. "Ms. Vance," Richard said carefully, "are you certain about this?" "Completely." Arya gestured for Ethan to sit. He did, feeling absurdly out of place at the massive conference table. "Mr. Cole, 2 nights ago you identified several problematic clauses in our preliminary agreement with the Helix Consortium. I need to know how accurate your assessment was." "I don't understand, ma'am," Maya spoke up, her accent placing her somewhere in South America. "We had our top interpreters review those same documents. They found nothing concerning." "Then maybe I was wrong," Ethan said. "Were you?" Arya leaned forward. "The Vietnamese modification clause, the unilateral pricing adjustment in Mandarin, the precedence issue with the Portuguese terms. Were you wrong about any of that?" Ethan met her eyes. "No, ma'am." Richard made a disgusted sound. "Ms. Vance, this man is a janitor. Our interpreters have advanced degrees from—" "Our interpreters missed it," Arya cut him off. "Whatever it was, they missed it. And we're 48 hours from signing a deal that could define this company's next decade. So I'm going to ask Mr. Cole some questions, and you're going to listen to his answers. Clear?" The room fell silent. Arya opened a folder and slid it across the table. "New draft. They sent it this morning. Portuguese section. Page 12. What do you see?" Ethan picked up the document, aware of everyone watching him. The Portuguese was dense, full of legal terminology that would trip up most translators. But underneath the complexity, there was something else. A pattern. "The delivery timeline has changed," he said slowly. "It looks like a minor adjustment, shifting from quarterly to monthly deliverables. But the penalty clauses for missed deliveries haven't changed to match. They're still based on the quarterly schedule." "Meaning?" Richard asked, despite himself. "Meaning if you miss a single monthly delivery, you pay the penalty for missing a quarter's worth of product. The math doesn't scale. It's a trap." Maya grabbed the document and started reading. Her expression darkened. "Merda, he's right." "Keep going," Arya said to Ethan. "German section. Anything unusual?" For the next 40 minutes, Ethan went through the document piece by piece, catching inconsistencies between translations, identifying clauses that seemed standard but weren't, pointing out places where the language created loopholes wide enough to drive a truck through. Richard and Maya went from skeptical to stunned to something close to panic. "This is deliberate," Maya said finally. "They're not negotiating in good faith. They're setting up a controlled collapse," Ethan finished. "You sign this deal, everything looks good for 6 months. Then the penalties start triggering. The pricing adjustments kick in. The modification clauses activate. Within a year, they'd own 40% of your operational capacity without paying for it." "How the hell do you know all this?" Richard demanded. Ethan set down the papers. "I traveled a lot when I was younger. Worked in places where contracts were weapons. You learn to read between the lines or you lose everything." "Where specifically?" Maya pressed. "Vietnam, Thailand, Brazil, Morocco, Poland, wherever I could find work." "Doing what?" "Whatever people needed, translating, guiding, fixing things." He paused. "Surviving." Arya had been quiet, watching him with an intensity that made Ethan want to leave the room. Now she spoke. "Why didn't you ever put this on a resume, apply for a real position?" "I did, when I first came back to the States. Nobody's interested in hiring someone whose degree is survival and whose references are people you can't contact anymore." He met her eyes. "Besides, I've got a daughter. I needed steady work, not interviews that might lead nowhere. The cleaning job was guaranteed, so I took it." "And you've been wasting 3 years pushing a mop," Richard muttered. "I haven't been wasting anything," Ethan said quietly. "I've been keeping my daughter fed." The silence that followed was different, uncomfortable in a new way. Arya stood. "Richard, Maya, I need the room." They left, though Richard looked like he wanted to argue. When the door closed, Arya walked to the windows and stared out at the city. "The Helix deal closes in 2 days," she said. "Final negotiation session tomorrow. High-level executives from 7 countries. Our team is good, but they're not good enough. Not for this. Ma'am, I want you there." Ethan's stomach dropped. "That's not possible." "Why not?" "Because I'm a janitor. Because I don't belong in that room. Because you're the only person in this building who actually saw the knife they were hiding." Arya turned to face him. "I don't care about your resume, Mr. Cole. I care about whether my company survives the next 48 hours. Can you help me or not?" Every rational part of Ethan's brain screamed at him to walk away. This wasn't his world. This wasn't his fight. He had Sophie to think about, rent to pay, a life that worked precisely because it was small and invisible. But he thought about those documents, about the trap someone had laid with such careful precision, about how many people would lose their jobs if Vance Industries collapsed, about Arya Vance standing in front of him asking for help. "What would you need me to do?" he heard himself ask. "Sit in the room. Listen. Tell me if they're lying. If anyone recognizes me, they won't. To them, you're nobody." She said it without cruelty, just stating a fact they both knew was true. "You'll be introduced as a consultant. You'll sit in the back. You'll keep your mouth shut unless I ask you a direct question. And if this works, if we get through this without signing a suicide pact," she paused, "we'll talk about what comes next. And if it doesn't work, then we both get fired and at least you'll have a good story." Despite everything, Ethan almost smiled. "What time tomorrow?" 9 a.m. "Wear something better than that shirt." "Yes, ma'am." He stood to leave, but Arya's voice stopped him. "Mr. Cole, why are you doing this?" Ethan thought about Sophie, about the life he'd built from nothing, about all the years of being invisible. "Because you asked," he said simply. He left her standing by the windows, the city spread out behind her like a promise or a threat, and took the service elevator back down to reality. That night, he told Sophie he had an important meeting in the morning and might be home late. "Is everything okay, Dad?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just work stuff." She studied him with those 2 old eyes. "You look scared." "I'm not scared. I'm just—" He stopped. He'd never lied to her before. Yeah, maybe a little scared. Of what? Of messing up something important. Sophie hugged him. You won't mess up. You're the smartest person I know. Ethan held her tight and prayed she was right. The next morning, wearing a borrowed tie and a suit jacket that didn't quite fit, Ethan Cole rode the elevator up to the 42nd floor and walked toward the biggest negotiation of Aria Vance's career. He had no idea that in less than 4 hours he would break every rule they'd set. He had no idea that 30 seconds of courage would change everything. He only knew that somewhere between the poverty and the languages and the years of being invisible, he'd learned to see what others missed. And today, finally, someone was listening. The conference room on the 42nd floor had been transformed overnight into something that looked more like a war room than a place for business deals. 3 massive screens lined one wall, each displaying real-time market data from different continents. A table that could seat 30 people stretched down the center, already surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than Ethan's car. The air conditioning hummed at a temperature cold enough to keep everyone alert, and someone had brought in coffee service that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel. Ethan stood near the back wall, trying to be furniture. You look like you're about to face a firing squad, Maya Santos said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. She offered him one. Relax. The worst they can do is ignore you. That's what I'm hoping for. Aria doesn't bring people into rooms like this hoping they'll be ignored. Maya took a sip of her coffee, studying him over the rim. What you found in those documents, my team should have caught that. We've got people with PhDs in international law who missed things a janitor saw in 20 minutes. That's either embarrassing for us or impressive for you. Probably both, Ethan said. She laughed. It was genuine, and some of the tension in his chest loosened slightly. I like you. Try not to get fired today. I'll do my best. The door opened and Aria walked in, flanked by Richard Delacroix and 3 other executives Ethan didn't recognize. She was wearing a dark blue suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look even sharper than usual. Her eyes scanned the room, landed on Ethan for half a second, then moved on. They'll be here in 5 minutes, she said to the room at large. Final positions? We're offering the revised terms from yesterday's draft. Quarterly deliverables, transparent pricing structure, mutual modification clauses. If they push back on the Vietnamese precedence issue, we walk. Clear? A chorus of agreements followed. And if they try the shell game again? Richard asked. Then we call it. Aria's voice was steel. I'm not signing a deal that destroys us in 12 months just to make quarterly earnings look good now. The elevator chimed. Everyone in the room seemed to take a collective breath. 7 people filed in, led by a tall man with silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Carl Brenner, CEO of Helix Consortium's European division. Behind him came a woman in her 50s with sharp features and sharper eyes. Yuki Tanaka, head of their Asian operations. Then 3 others whose names Ethan didn't catch, and finally, trailing at the back like an afterthought, a younger man in an expensive suit who carried himself like someone used to being underestimated. That last one made Ethan's instincts prickle. Aria, Carl said, spreading his arms like they were old friends. You look radiant as always. Shall we get started? Let's. Aria gestured to the table. I believe you've reviewed our revised terms. We have. Carl settled into his chair with the comfort of someone who'd sat at 1,000 negotiation tables. And we have some concerns. Of course they did. For the next 90 minutes, Ethan watched a masterclass in corporate warfare disguised as polite conversation. Aria and her team pushed. Carl's team pushed back. Terms were debated, percentages adjusted by fractions, delivery schedules negotiated down to the day. To anyone watching casually, it looked like normal business. High stakes, sure, but normal. But Ethan wasn't watching casually. He was watching the young man at the back of Helix's delegation, the one nobody had introduced, who hadn't spoken once, but whose eyes tracked every word like he was cataloging ammunition, and he was watching the micro-expressions that crossed Carl Brenner's face whenever certain clauses came up. The slight tightening around his eyes when Aria mentioned the Vietnamese precedence issue. The too-quick agreement when she proposed transparency and pricing adjustments. They were still playing games, just more carefully now. I think we can agree on the quarterly deliverables, Carl said, leaning back in his chair. But the penalty structure seems harsh. A 15% fee for missed deadlines? That's excessive. It's standard, Richard countered, for some industries. Not for this scale of operation. Carl gestured to Yuki, who slid a document across the table. We'd propose a graduated penalty system, 5% for the first missed deadline, increasing incrementally. Arya picked up the document. Her eyes scanned it quickly, but Ethan could see the slight tension in her shoulders. Something was wrong. This seems reasonable on the surface, she said carefully. But I'd like our team to review it before we agree to anything. Of course, Carl's smile widened. Take your time. Arya passed the document to Richard, who started reading, then to Maya, then to the other executives. It made its way around the table, each person spending a few minutes with it, nodding, making notes. No one said anything. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. From where he stood, he couldn't see the document clearly, but he could see something else. The young man at the back of Helix's delegation was watching Arya's team with an expression that was almost smug. They'd done it again. Hidden something in plain sight. Richard set down the document. I don't see any issues with this. It's actually more favorable than our current structure. Maya? Arya asked. Looks clean to me. The graduated approach makes sense for a project this size. Around the table, heads nodded. Carl Brenner's smile grew. Arya looked at the document one more time, and Ethan could see her trying to find what wasn't there. But without reading every language version, without understanding the subtle differences in how legal terms translated across cultures, she couldn't see it. But Ethan could. He didn't plan to speak. He'd promised to keep his mouth shut unless asked directly. But watching Arya about to agree to something that would gut her company, watching her trust her team, because that's what good leaders did, something inside him snapped. Ms. Vance? Every head in the room turned toward him. Arya's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of surprise she let show. Yes, Mr. Cole? May I see the document? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Carl Brenner's smile disappeared. The young man at the back of Helix's delegation sat up straighter, no longer looking smug. I'm sorry, Carl said, his voice carefully polite. Who is this? A consultant, Arya said smoothly, though Ethan could hear the question underneath. What are you doing? Mr. Cole has been helping us with some of the finer details. I see. Carl's eyes raked over Ethan, taking in the borrowed suit, the too-wide tie, the hands that looked more comfortable holding a mop than a contract. And what exactly is your area of expertise, Mr. Cole? Languages, Ethan said. May I see the document, Ms. Vance? For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, Arya held his gaze. Then she slid the papers across the table toward him. Ethan picked them up and started reading. The English version looked fine, exactly what they'd described. Graduated penalties, reasonable terms, actually favorable for Vance Industries. But that wasn't the version that mattered. He flipped to the German translation, then the Mandarin. Then, there it was. The Vietnamese version defines missed deadline differently than the English, he said quietly. In English, it's based on final delivery dates. In Vietnamese, it's based on interim milestone dates that aren't listed anywhere in the English text. Richard grabbed the document back. That's ridiculous. Where does it say? Ethan pointed to a specific paragraph. Third clause, second subsection. The phrasing looks like standard legal boilerplate, but Doihan Jiaohang, in this context, refers to process milestones, not final deliverables. And since the Vietnamese version takes precedence in any conflicts, which we removed, Carl interrupted, but his voice had lost its warmth. From the explicit precedence clause, yes. Ethan met his eyes. But it's still embedded in the dispute resolution section. Page 47, Mandarin version. Any disagreements about timeline definitions default to the original language version for that specific clause, which in this case is Vietnamese. Maya was speed reading the document now, her face going pale. Merda, he's right. They'd be able to trigger penalties every 3 weeks based on internal milestones we don't even have visibility into. That's absurd, Yuki Tanaka said, but she didn't sound surprised. She sounded annoyed at being caught. Is it? Arya's voice cut across the room like a blade. Because it seems very deliberate to me. Carl Brenner stood. I think we need a recess. I think we need honesty, Arya shot back. This is the third time. Third time we found critical discrepancies between language versions. Either your legal team is catastrophically incompetent or this is intentional sabotage. Which is it? Ms. Vance, I understand you're upset, but accusing us of… I'm not accusing. I'm stating facts. Arya stood as well, and suddenly the room felt much smaller. You've been negotiating in bad faith from day one. Hiding traps in translation, banking on us missing them because who actually reads every version, right? Well, congratulations, we read them. The young man at the back of Helix's delegation finally spoke. His English was perfect, accent neutral, and cold. You read them because of him. He gestured at Ethan. Your janitor. The word hung in the air like a slap. Excuse me? Arya's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. We did our homework, Ms. Vance. Ethan Cole, night maintenance staff, high school education, no formal credentials in linguistics or international law, and yet somehow he's catching details that escape your actual experts. The young man smiled. Either he's a savant who's been wasting his life pushing a mop, or someone's feeding him information. Which is it, Mr. Cole? Ethan's jaw tightened. Nobody's feeding me anything. Then explain how a janitor knows Vietnamese contract law. I learned it the same way you learned to be condescending. Practice. Someone on Arya's side of the table made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The young man's smile vanished. Carl Brenner raised a hand. Enough. Chen, stand down. So that was his name, Chen. Ethan filed it away. We clearly have some communication issues to resolve, Carl continued. I suggest we reconvene tomorrow after both teams have had time to review. No, Arya said flatly. Everyone stared at her. No more recesses, no more revised drafts with new traps buried in them. We're going to sit in this room and negotiate a clean deal in plain language with no games, or we walk away right now. Carl's expression hardened. You're not in a position to make demands, Ms. Vance. We both know Vance Industries needs this deal more than Helix does. Do we? Arya smiled, and it was the coldest thing Ethan had ever seen. Because I'm looking at 7 executives who flew across 3 continents to be here. I'm looking at a consortium that's been trying very hard to lock us into terms that benefit them enormously. That doesn't sound like a partnership you can walk away from easily. You're right, Carl said. It's a partnership, which means compromise. I'm all for compromise. I'm not for fraud. The word landed like a bomb. Carl's face flushed. That is a very serious accusation. Then prove me wrong. Negotiate honestly or leave. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, could feel everyone in the room recalculating angles and strategies. This was the moment. Either Helix walked away and the deal died, or they stayed and admitted they'd been caught. Carl Brenner looked at Yuki Tanaka, then at Chen, then back at Arya. Fine, he said. Clean terms. English only, reviewed by both legal teams simultaneously. But that means you don't get the favorable pricing structure we offered. Why not? Because those terms were based on the timeline we proposed. Change the timeline, change the pricing. The timeline you proposed was rigged, Maya said. The timeline we proposed was aggressive, Yuki corrected. There's a difference. And so it began again. But this time, something had shifted. The masks were off. Both sides knew the other had been playing games, and now they were negotiating like adults instead of con artists. It took 4 more hours. 4 hours of line-by-line review. 4 hours of arguing over percentages and definitions and delivery schedules. 4 hours where Ethan stood against the back wall, occasionally pulled in when someone needed a phrase clarified or a translation verified, but mostly just watching. Watching Arya hold her ground when Carl tried to bully her on pricing. Watching Richard actually earn his salary by catching a modification clause that would have given Helix unilateral control over supplier relationships. Watching Maya negotiate delivery schedules with Yuki in a mix of English and Portuguese that left both of them grudgingly respecting each other. At 3:47 p.m., Carl Brenner pushed back from the table and rubbed his eyes. I think we have a deal, he said. He sounded exhausted. Pending final legal review, Arya added. Of course. Carl stood and offered his hand. Arya shook it. I have to say, Ms. Vance, you drive a hard bargain. I protect my company. Clearly. His eyes flicked to Ethan. And you have interesting resources. I have good people. Carl nodded slowly. Then he and his delegation gathered their materials and left, Chen shooting one last unreadable look at Ethan before the elevator doors closed. The moment they were gone, everyone on Arya's side of the table seemed to deflate simultaneously. Holy hell, Richard muttered. I need a drink. You need several, Maya agreed. That was... She looked at Arya. Either brilliant or insane. Probably both. Arya turned to Ethan. You broke protocol. Yes, ma'am. I told you to stay quiet unless I asked you a direct question. Yes, ma'am. You could have cost us the entire deal. Ethan said nothing. She was right. Arya stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she smiled. Thank you. The room exhaled. Don't thank him, Richard said, but he was smiling too. He just gave me 3 new ulcers. Worth it, though, Maya said. Did you see Carl's face when Ethan explained the Vietnamese clause? I thought he was going to have a stroke. Chen's face was better, someone else added. He looked like he'd just watched his master plan crumble. They were all talking now, the tension breaking into something that felt almost like celebration. But Ethan felt the weight of what had just happened settling onto his shoulders. He'd stepped out of the shadows. He'd made himself visible. And there was no going back. Arya touched his elbow. Walk with me. They left the others in the conference room and took the elevator down to the 39th floor, which was mostly empty, just a few offices used for storage and overflow. You know what you just did, right? Arya said once they were alone. Probably ruined my life. Probably saved mine. She leaned against the wall, some of the CEO armor falling away. She looked tired. Human. That deal was a trap. If we'd signed the version they originally proposed, Helix would have owned us in a year. If we'd signed today's version without your catch, they'd have bled us dry through penalty fees. She shook her head. My team, my highly paid, extensively credentialed team, missed all of it. They're looking at the big picture. Sometimes you need someone who's used to surviving on details. Is that what you were doing? All those years traveling? Surviving? Ethan looked out the window at the city below. Yeah, that's exactly what I was doing. Why'd you come back? Because I met someone. We had a daughter, and she deserved better than a father who was always running. He paused. Didn't work out the way I planned. Life rarely does. Arya was quiet for a moment. Chen was right about one thing. You're wasting your skills pushing a mop. Maybe. But the mop pays rent. What if I offered you something better? Ethan's heart kicked. Ms. Vance. Not charity. A job. Real work. We clearly need someone who can do what you do. Catch the things everyone else misses. Be our safety net on international deals. She met his eyes. I can't match what someone like Chen probably makes, but I can pay you enough that you don't have to work nights anymore. Enough that you can actually see your daughter grow up. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? The catch is you'd be working in a world that doesn't want you there. You saw how they looked at you, like you were something that crawled out from under a rock. No degree, no pedigree, just some guy who knows things. Arya shrugged. You'd be fighting for respect every single day. I've been invisible for 3 years. Fighting for respect sounds like an upgrade. Is that a yes? Ethan thought about Sophie, about pancakes with chocolate chips and bedtime stories he was too tired to read, about Mrs. Chen watching her night after night because he had to work, about the medical bills that never got smaller no matter how many extra shifts he took, about the look on Arya Vance's face when she realized he'd just saved her company. Can I think about it? You have 24 hours. After that, I need an answer. They rode the elevator back up in silence. When the doors opened on 42, the celebration was still going. Someone had ordered champagne, apparently, and Richard was making a toast that involved a lot of swearing. Ethan slipped away before anyone noticed, took the service elevator down, and walked out into the late afternoon sun. His phone buzzed. Dad, guess what happened at school? Sophie. Always Sophie. Tell me everything, he typed back. I did a handstand for 22 seconds. Ms. Park said it was the longest in the whole class. That's amazing, kiddo. I'm so proud of you. Are you coming home soon? Ethan looked back at the Vance Industries building, towering above him like a mountain he'd just climbed without meaning to. Yeah, he wrote. I'll be home soon, and we need to talk about something important. He walked toward the bus stop, his mind already racing through everything that would change if he said yes to Arya's offer. Everything that could go wrong. Everything that could go right. Behind him, high above in a conference room full of people celebrating a victory they didn't fully understand, Arya Vance stood at the window watching him go. You're really going to hire him? Richard asked, appearing beside her. If he says yes, the board will lose their minds. The board didn't just save us $300 million and our company's future. He did. Arya turned away from the window. Besides, we need someone who thinks differently, someone who sees what we miss, someone who isn't afraid to break the rules, Maya added, joining them. Arya smiled. That too. But she was thinking about the way Ethan had looked when Chen called him a janitor. Not angry, not defensive, just tired, like he'd heard it before, like he'd learned to expect it. She made a mental note to make sure Chen never worked with Vance Industries again. Downstairs, Ethan caught his bus and rode it home through a city that felt different somehow. Sharper, more full of possibility and danger in equal measure. When he walked into his apartment, Sophie launched herself at him. Dad, did you see my text? 22 seconds. I did. You're basically a superhero now. She giggled and dragged him to the kitchen, chattering about her day. Ethan made dinner, spaghetti with meat sauce, her favorite, and listened to her talk about handstands and spelling tests, and a boy named Marcus who ate paste. After dinner, after dishes, after her bath and pajamas and the chapter of the book they were reading together, Ethan sat on the edge of her bed. Sophie, remember how I said I had an important meeting today? Did you mess up? No. Actually, I think I did really well. Then why do you look worried? Because she saw everything. His daughter, who noticed what everyone else missed, just like him. Because the person I met with offered me a new job, a different job, one that would mean I wouldn't have to work nights anymore. Sophie's eyes went wide. Really? Really. But it would also mean things would change. I'd be working with people who are very different from us, and I don't know if I'd be good at it. You're good at everything, Dad. I'm not, kiddo. I'm good at surviving, but this would be different. Sophie was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, Would you be home more? Yeah, I would. Then you should do it. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. She grabbed his hand. You're always sad when you leave at night, and I'm always sad when you're gone. If this job makes you not sad and home more, then you should do it. Ethan's throat tightened. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just finally noticed. He laughed and hugged her tight. Get some sleep, superhero. Dad? Yeah? I'm proud of you, too. After she fell asleep, Ethan sat in the living room staring at his phone. 22 hours left to make a decision. 22 hours to choose between safety and possibility. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mr. Cole, this is Chen from Helix Consortium. I think we should talk. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside Cafe. I have a proposition that might interest you. Ethan stared at the message for a full minute. Then he deleted it without responding and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easy because he knew, with the certainty of someone who'd learned to read danger in 6 languages, that everything was about to get more complicated. And somewhere across the city, in an expensive hotel room, Chen made another call. She's going to hire him, he said to whoever answered. The janitor. She's going to bring him in. A pause while he listened. Yes, I'm sure, which means we need to accelerate the timeline. Another pause. I understand. I'll handle it. He hung up and looked out at the city lights, a smile playing at his lips. The game wasn't over. It was just getting interesting. Ethan woke at 6 a.m. to Sophie singing in the shower, badly off key and completely unself-conscious. He lay in bed listening to her mangle some pop song he didn't recognize and thought about how many mornings he'd missed because he'd been dead asleep after working all night. How many breakfasts? How many small moments that added up to a childhood? 20 hours left to decide. He made eggs and toast while Sophie got dressed, and they ate together at the small kitchen table that wobbled no matter what he put under the short leg. "You're home," she said, like it was a miracle. "I'm home." "Does that mean you took the job?" "Not yet. I'm still thinking." She studied him with those two knowing eyes. "What's stopping you?" How did he explain it to a 7-year-old? That he was terrified of failing in a world he didn't understand? That being invisible had been safe, and safety mattered when you had a daughter depending on you? "I guess I'm scared," he said finally. "Of what?" "Of not being good enough." Sophie took a bite of toast, considering this. "But you were good enough yesterday, right? That's why they want you." Yesterday was different. Yesterday was one meeting. This would be every day. So you'd be good enough every day instead of just yesterday. She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "That's better, Dad." He couldn't argue with her logic, even if his fear didn't care about logic. After he walked Sophie to school, Ethan found himself with hours to kill before he had to make a decision. He couldn't go back to sleep, couldn't sit still. So he did what he always did when his mind was racing. He walked. The city in daytime was different than the one he saw at night. Fuller, louder. People rushing to jobs in buildings they'd spend all day trying to leave. He walked past coffee shops where executives argued over contracts on their phones, past construction sites where men in hard hats rebuilt the city one floor at a time, past the small park where homeless people were packing up their sleeping bags before the police came. He knew this version of the world, had lived in it, adjacent to it, invisible within it for 3 years. But if he took Arya's offer, he'd be crossing some line he couldn't uncross. He'd be visible, accountable, expected to perform. His phone buzzed. Not Chen this time. The number was blocked. He almost didn't answer, but something made him press the green button. "Mr. Cole?" A woman's voice, professional, unfamiliar. "My name is Lauren Fisher. I represent the Helix Consortium's North American interests." Ethan stopped walking. "How did you get this number?" "That's not important. What's important is that we'd like to speak with you about an opportunity." "I'm not interested. You haven't heard what we're offering." "Don't need to. I'm not for sale." "Everyone's for sale, Mr. Cole. It's just a question of price." Her voice was smooth, practiced. "We're prepared to offer you a consulting contract, $50,000 for a single day's work. All you'd need to do is review our next set of proposals for Vance Industries and let us know if there are any translation issues we should be aware of." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You want me to help you hide more traps? We want to avoid miscommunication. Surely you can see the value in that." "What I see is bribery. We prefer to call it appropriate compensation for valuable expertise." She paused. $50,000 would make a significant dent in your debt, wouldn't it? Medical bills, student loans, rent, all those things that keep a single father up at night. Cold washed down Ethan's spine. "How do you know about—" "We do our homework, Mr. Cole, and we take care of people who help us. Think about your daughter. Think about what that money could do for her future." "Leave my daughter out of this." "Of course. But the offer stands. 24 hours. After that, we'll assume you've chosen a side." The line went dead. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, people flowing around him like water around a stone, and felt the world shrinking. Helix knew about Sophie, about his debt, about everything that mattered, which meant they were either very thorough or very threatened. Probably both. He called Arya. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Cole, have you made a decision?" "Helix just offered me $50,000 to work for them instead." Silence. Then, "Where are you?" 23rd and Madison. "Stay there. I'm sending a car." 10 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up. The driver didn't speak, just gestured for Ethan to get in. They drove through morning traffic to a building Ethan didn't recognize, smaller than Vance Industries headquarters, older, tucked between two newer constructions like something forgotten. Arya was waiting in a conference room on the third floor. So were Richard and Maya, and two other people Ethan hadn't met, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and a man who looked like he'd never smiled in his life. "This is Catherine Vance," Arya said, gesturing to the gray-haired woman. "My mother and the founder of this company, and Paul Hendricks, our head of security." Ethan shook their hands, feeling increasingly out of his depth. "Tell us exactly what they said," Catherine Vance commanded. Her voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Ethan repeated the conversation with Lauren Fisher word for word. When he mentioned Sophie, Catherine's expression hardened. "They investigated you, Chum," Paul said. "It wasn't a question. Probably started the moment you opened your mouth in that meeting. Standard corporate espionage, background check, financial records, looking for pressure points. Is my daughter safe? Yes, they're not that stupid, but they are trying to leverage you." Paul pulled out a tablet and started typing. "Lauren Fisher is a fixer. She handles problems that can't be solved through normal channels. If Helix brought her in, they're worried." "Good," Arya said. "They should be." "The question is what Mr. Cole does now," Richard said. "If he takes their money—" "I'm not taking their money," Ethan cut him off. "Even if it would solve your financial problems?" Catherine asked. She was watching him like a hawk studying prey. "Even then." "Why?" Ethan thought about the documents he'd read, about the traps designed to destroy Arya's company slowly, about Chen's smug face when he thought they'd won. "Because they're trying to buy my integrity, and that's not for sale." Catherine smiled. It transformed her face. "Good answer, Arya. Hire him." "I was planning to," Arya said dryly, "but Mr. Cole hasn't said yes yet." All eyes turned to Ethan. He thought about Sophie's words. "You'd be good enough every day, instead of just yesterday." He thought about Lauren Fisher's oily voice, promising him an easy way out. He thought about 3 years of being invisible, and whether he was ready to stop. "What exactly would the job be?" he asked. Maya leaned forward. "You'd be on my team, international development. Your official title would be senior language consultant, but really you'd be our insurance policy. Every major deal, every contract, every negotiation, you'd be there catching what the rest of us miss. How much travel? And some, maybe 1 week a month. We'd work around your daughter's schedule as much as possible." "Salary?" $85,000 to start, Arya said, with performance bonuses that could push it over 100, full benefits, 4 weeks vacation, and we'll cover Sophie's healthcare completely. No deductibles, no copays, everything. Ethan did the math in his head. It would take him 3 years at his current job to make what they were offering for one. And the healthcare alone, when would I start? "Today," Catherine said, "because Helix isn't going to stop at bribery. They're going to escalate. And we need you inside before they make their next move." "What next move?" "The one where they try to destroy you instead of buy you," Paul said flatly. "You embarrassed them, made them look incompetent, cost them a deal they thought they had locked down. People like Carl Brenner and Chen don't forget that. So I'm a target now." "You were a target the moment you opened your mouth in that conference room," Catherine said. "The question is whether you want to face them alone or with us behind you." It was manipulation, Ethan knew. Elegant manipulation dressed up as protection, but manipulation nonetheless. They needed him, and they were making sure he understood the danger of refusing. But the thing was, they weren't wrong. "I need to make a phone call," he said. They gave him privacy. He stepped into the hallway and called Mrs. Chen. "Ethan, is everything okay?" "Yeah, but I need to ask you something. How would you feel about watching Sophie a little longer each day for the next few weeks?" "I'd pay you more, obviously, but is this about a new job?" "How did you—" "Sophie told me you might not work nights anymore. She's very excited." Mrs. Chen's voice warmed. "Of course I'll help. That child and I are great friends. We'll be fine." "Thank you, I mean it." "Ethan, whatever this new job is, take it. You've been running on fumes for 3 years. Time to let someone else carry some weight." He hung up and went back into the conference room. 5 pairs of eyes locked onto him. "Okay," he said. "I'm in." Arya smiled. "Welcome to Vance Industries, Mr. Cole." The next 3 hours were a blur of paperwork, ID badges, computer access, and security briefings. Paul Hendricks took him through protocols for handling sensitive information, emergency contacts, and what to do if anyone from Helix approached him again. "Report it immediately," Paul said. "Don't engage, don't negotiate, just walk away and call me." "You think they'll try again?" "I think they'll do whatever they need to do to protect their interests, which means you need to be careful. Watch your back, trust your instincts, and for the love of everything, don't go anywhere alone with anyone you don't know." By noon, Ethan had an office. Small, barely more than a closet with a window, but it was his. His name was on the door in temporary letters: Ethan Cole, Senior Language Consultant. He stood in the doorway staring at it, feeling like he'd stepped into someone else's life. "Looks good on you," Maya said, appearing beside him with 2 sandwiches. "Lunch?" They ate in his new office while she explained how her department worked. There were 12 people on the international development team, experts in various markets, negotiators, analysts, legal specialists, and now him. "They're going to hate you at first," Maya said matter-of-factly. "Not because of you personally, because you make them look bad. You found things they missed. That's threatening. Great, so I'll be fighting my own team." "For a while, yeah, but they'll come around once they see you're not trying to replace them. You're just," she searched for the word, "a different kind of tool in the toolbox." "That's reassuring." She grinned. "You'll be fine. Just don't be an ass about being right, and we'll all survive." That afternoon, Maya brought him into a meeting about a potential deal with a manufacturing consortium in Southeast Asia. 6 people around a table, all of them with advanced degrees and years of experience, all of them looking at Ethan like he was a mistake that would be corrected soon. "This is Ethan Cole," Maya introduced him. "He'll be reviewing all our international contracts going forward. Ethan, this is the team." Nods. A few forced smiles. One woman, Jennifer something, openly rolled her eyes. They spent 2 hours going through proposals written in Thai, Malay, and Indonesian. The team's regular translator, a man named David who looked like he'd never left a library, walked them through each section with meticulous detail. Ethan listened, said nothing, watched. 3/4 of the way through, David explained a clause about intellectual property rights. It sounded reasonable, standard protection for both parties. "Thoughts, Mr. Cole?" Maya asked. Everyone looked at him, testing him, waiting for him to prove he didn't belong. "The Thai version says something slightly different," Ethan said carefully. "The English talks about shared development rights, but the Thai phrase, sit thiain ka arfathna arwam kan, implies temporary shared rights that revert to the original holder after a set period." David's face flushed. "That's a very nuanced interpretation." "It's the correct interpretation. The time frame is buried in another clause, Section 4, where it references standard industry terms without defining them." Jennifer leaned forward, skeptical. "And you think that's a problem?" "I think it's intentional ambiguity, which means in 3 years they could claim the rights revert back to them, and we'd have nothing in English to contradict it." "That's absurd," David said. "They wouldn't." "They would," Maya cut in, "because we've seen this before." She looked at Ethan. "Nice catch." The meeting continued, but something had shifted. People started asking Ethan questions instead of waiting for him to volunteer. David looked like he'd been slapped, but even he couldn't argue with what was clearly there in the text. After the meeting, Jennifer cornered Ethan in the hallway. "That was either really lucky or really good," she said. "Which do you think it was?" She studied him. "I think you're going to make my job harder," which I respect, actually. David's been phoning it in for months. Maybe you'll keep him honest. "I'm not trying to—" Yeah, you're not trying to replace anyone. We've heard it." She smiled slightly. "But you did just show us up pretty badly, so don't expect us to love you right away." "I'll try to contain my disappointment." She laughed. "You're going to be okay, Janitor. Just don't get cocky." By 5 p.m., Ethan's brain was mush. He'd reviewed 4 different contracts, sat through 3 meetings, and met more people than he could possibly remember. When Maya finally told him to go home, he nearly kissed her. He picked up Sophie from Mrs. Chen's apartment and walked her home through the evening light. "So?" Sophie asked. "Did you take the job?" "I took the job." She squealed and threw her arms around his waist. "Does that mean you'll be home at night now?" "Most nights, yeah. Can we have dinner together? Like normal families?" The words hit him harder than they should have. "Yeah, kiddo, we can have dinner together." That night, Ethan made spaghetti again. Apparently his repertoire was limited, and they ate at their wobbly table while Sophie told him everything that had happened at school. After dinner, they watched a movie together. A kid's thing with talking animals that made no sense, but Sophie loved it, so Ethan pretended to follow along. When he tucked her into bed, she grabbed his hand. "Dad, are you happy now?" "Getting there, sweetheart." "Good. You deserve to be happy." After she fell asleep, Ethan sat in the living room with his new laptop, provided by Vance Industries, password protected, encrypted, and tried to process everything that had changed in 48 hours. His phone buzzed. "Aria. How was day 1? Survived. Your team hates me. They'll get over it. Good work in Maya's meeting. How did you—" "She sent me notes. The IP clause you caught would have cost us millions down the line." Ethan stared at the message, not sure how to respond. "Get some sleep," Aria sent. "Tomorrow's going to be harder." "Why?" "Because Carl Brenner just requested a follow-up meeting, and he specifically asked for you to be there." Ethan's stomach dropped. Why would he do that? Either to intimidate you or to recruit you. Either way, it's going to be uncomfortable. Be here at 9 a.m. He set down the phone and walked to the window. Outside, the city glittered with a million lights, each one marking a life, a story, a person fighting their own battles. Somewhere out there, Carl Brenner and Chen were planning their next move. Lauren Fisher was probably already on the phone with someone, escalating her approach. Helix Consortium, wounded and angry, was regrouping. And Ethan Cole, former janitor, current senior language consultant, was standing in the middle of it all, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "Last chance, Mr. Cole. The offer is now $75,000. One conversation. That's all we're asking." Ethan blocked the number and turned off his phone. He checked on Sophie one more time, sleeping peacefully, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, then went to bed. Sleep came slowly. When it finally did, his dreams were full of conference rooms and languages colliding, and Chen's cold smile promising that this was far from over. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Vance Industries at 8:30. The lobby that he'd walked through 1,000 times as an invisible janitor now felt different. People nodded to him. The receptionist called him Mr. Cole. The elevator took him up instead of down to the service levels. Maya met him on the 42nd floor with coffee and a grim expression. "Carl's bringing a full delegation. 8 people, including Chen. They say they want to discuss implementation details for the deal we negotiated, but they want to test me. Probably. Aria wants you to sit in but stay quiet unless something's wrong. Let them talk. Let them think they're in control. And if they try something, then you do what you did last time. Speak up. Blow the whistle." She paused. "But be prepared. They're not going to be friendly." The conference room was already set up. Aria and Richard were reviewing notes. Catherine Vance was there too, which surprised Ethan. She didn't usually attend operational meetings. "Mr. Cole," she said when he entered, "ready for round 2? "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good, because Carl Brenner is going to try to rattle you. He's going to question your credentials, your background, your right to be in the room. Don't take the bait. Stay calm. Answer honestly. And remember, you've already won. They're here because they're worried." The elevator chimed. Carl Brenner walked in first, all artificial warmth and expensive suit. Behind him came Yuki Tanaka, still unreadable. Then Chen, whose eyes locked onto Ethan with an intensity that made his skin crawl. And finally 5 others, lawyers, executives, people who looked like they could buy and sell companies before breakfast. "Aria," Carl said. "Catherine, thank you for seeing us on such short notice." "Carl," Aria gestured to the table. "Shall we begin?" They sat, the 2 sides facing each other across polished wood. Ethan took a seat slightly behind Arya's right shoulder, close enough to hear everything, far enough back to seem unimportant. But Chen was watching him, hadn't stopped watching since he entered. Before we discuss implementation, Carl said, I'd like to address an irregularity from our last meeting. What irregularity? Catherine asked. Mr. Cole. Carl's eyes flicked to Ethan. I've been doing some research. High school diploma, no college degree. No formal training in linguistics or international law. No certifications. No professional history and translation services. He spread his hands. And yet Vance Industries is trusting him with multi-million-dollar deals. Forgive me, but that seems unconventional, Arya finished. It is. It also works. Does it? Or did Mr. Cole get lucky once and you're gambling everything on beginner's luck? I don't gamble with my company. Chen leaned forward. Perhaps Mr. Cole would like to explain where he actually learned these skills. Because I've checked with every major translation program, every linguistics department, every certification body. His name appears nowhere. That's because I didn't learn in a classroom, Ethan said quietly. Where then? The world. Working, living, surviving. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Chen smiled, and it was reptilian. See, that's interesting, because I found something curious in my research. Ethan Cole. Disappeared for 6 years, age 20 to 26. No employment records, no tax returns, no credit history. Just, he snapped his fingers. Gone. And then suddenly reappeared with a daughter and a story about traveling the world. He paused. What were you really doing during those 6 years, Mr. Cole? The room went very quiet. Ethan felt every eye on him, felt the weight of that question and everything it implied. Felt Chen trying to make him into something suspicious, something dangerous, something that didn't belong. I was learning, he said. Learning what? How to infiltrate companies? How to steal industrial secrets? How to stay alive? Ethan's voice was hard now. How to work 12-hour days for cash that barely covered food. How to sleep in hostels where bedbugs were guaranteed and theft was common. How to learn languages because if you didn't, you starved. I was 20 years old and broke and stupid, and I thought seeing the world meant something. Turned out it meant being homeless in Bangkok and sick in Rio and scared in Warsaw. It meant eating once a day and sending every dollar I could back to my girlfriend who was pregnant and alone because I'd been too much of a coward to stay. The words came out harder than he meant them to. Raw. True. I learned languages because I had to. I learned to read contracts because people tried to cheat me every single day. I learned to survive because the alternative was dying in some city where nobody knew my name. And when I finally came home, when I finally tried to be a father, my daughter's mother was already sick and we had no insurance and the bills piled up faster than I could work. So yeah, I disappeared. I wasn't infiltrating anything. I was just another stupid kid who made bad choices and spent 6 years paying for them. Silence. Chen's smile had disappeared. Carl looked uncomfortable. Catherine Vance was watching Ethan with something that might have been respect. Well, Carl said finally, that's personal. Arya cut him off. And none of your business. Mr. Cole's background has no bearing on his ability to do his job, which he's proven. Repeatedly. Nevertheless, Carl continued, Helix has concerns about the security of our negotiations. We need assurance that sensitive information won't be... Are you accusing me of something? Ethan asked. I'm saying we need guarantees. You want me to sign an NDA? Fine. You want a background check? Do it. You want to monitor every conversation I have? Go ahead. Ethan leaned forward. But don't question my integrity because I didn't learn languages at Harvard. Don't imply I'm a spy because I have gaps in my employment history. And don't threaten my daughter to try to buy my loyalty. Because all that does is prove you're the ones who can't be trusted. Chen's face flushed. I never... Lauren Fisher, yesterday, $50,000 to consult on your proposals. She knew about my medical debt, about Sophie, about rent. You've been digging into my life looking for leverage. Ethan met his eyes. So let's stop pretending this is about security concerns. You're pissed because I caught you cheating, and now you want me gone or working for you. Neither's going to happen. Carl stood. I think we're done here. We haven't discussed implementation, Arya said calmly. We'll reschedule, when cooler heads prevail. He looked at Ethan one last time. Mr. Cole, I hope you understand what you're getting into. Same to you. They left, all 8 of them, filing out in tight-lipped silence. When the elevator doors closed, Catherine started laughing. Well, she said, that was entertaining. That was a disaster, Richard muttered. That was necessary, Arya corrected. They needed to know we're not backing down. They're going to retaliate, Maya said. You know that, right? Let them try. Ethan's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the table, trying to steady them. He just laid his entire life bare in front of people he barely knew, had admitted things he'd never told anyone, had burned every bridge with Helix in the span of 3 minutes. Mr. Cole, Catherine said, that was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. She smiled. Good. We need more of that around here. She stood. Arya, keep me posted. Mr. Cole, welcome to the real fight. After she left, Ethan looked at Arya. I just made this worse, didn't I? Maybe. But you also showed them we're not afraid. She paused. And you showed our team who you are. That matters. Does it? More than you know. Arya's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression hardened. We need to move. Now. What's wrong? Helix just filed a formal complaint with the International Trade Commission. They're alleging that Vance Industries used unlicensed consultants to gain unfair advantage in contract negotiations. She looked at Ethan. They're coming after you legally. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Ethan's mind went blank for 3 seconds, then kicked into overdrive. They can't do that, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew how naive they sounded. They can, and they did. Arya was already scrolling through her phone, her jaw tight. Richard, get our legal team on the line. Maya, pull every document related to Ethan's hiring. Personnel files, contracts, everything. I want a timeline of exactly when we brought him on versus when the Helix negotiations started. They're going to argue you hired him specifically to gain an unfair advantage, Richard said, already dialing. That you used inside knowledge from a maintenance worker who had access to their preliminary documents. Which is bullshit, Maya said. Ethan found those documents by accident. Doesn't matter. Perception is reality in cases like this. Richard pressed the phone to his ear. Yeah, it's me. We've got a situation. Ethan felt the walls closing in. He'd been at this job for exactly 1 day, and he'd already become a liability. A target, the thing that could bring down everything Arya had built. I should resign, he said quietly. Absolutely not, Arya shot back. If I'm the problem, you're not the problem. Helix is the problem. They're throwing a tantrum because they got caught cheating and you're the easiest person to attack. She looked at him directly. If you resign now, you're admitting guilt. You're validating every accusation they make. And more than that, you're letting them win. They're already winning. They filed a formal complaint. That's public record. Every company we negotiate with is going to hear about this. Let them hear. Catherine Vance's voice cut through the rising panic. She'd come back into the room without anyone noticing. Let them hear that Vance Industries doesn't back down from bullies. Let them hear that we stand by our people. With all due respect, Mrs. Vance, I'm not sure I'm worth this fight. Catherine walked up to him, and despite being a head shorter, she somehow looked down at him. My daughter built this company from nothing. I built the foundation she started from. We didn't do that by abandoning people the moment things got difficult. She paused. Helix is counting on you being expendable. Prove them wrong. Paul Hendricks appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. I've been monitoring their filing. It's aggressive, but sloppy. They're claiming Ethan had unauthorized access to confidential documents during his employment as maintenance staff, and that Vance Industries knowingly hired him to exploit that access. Can they prove any of that? Maya asked. They don't need to prove it. They just need to create enough doubt to damage our reputation. Paul looked at Ethan. When exactly did you first see those Helix documents? 2 nights before the big meeting. I was cleaning the conference room and they were on the table. And you weren't supposed to read them? I wasn't supposed to do a lot of things. But they were there and I saw something wrong, and I couldn't just ignore it. That's going to be their angle, Paul said. That you were spying, that you deliberately sought out information you had no right to access. I was doing my job, my actual job, cleaning. And how often did you read confidential documents while cleaning? The question hit like a slap. Ethan felt his face flush. Never. I never read anything before that night. Can you prove that? How the hell am I supposed to prove a negative? That's the point, Richard said, joining the conversation. They've framed this so that you're guilty until proven innocent. The burden of proof is on us. Arya's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, then answered. Yes? A pause. When? Another pause, longer this time. Her expression darkened. Understood. Thanks for the heads up. She lowered the phone. That was a friend at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Helix just filed a second complaint. They're alleging that our stock price benefited unfairly from the deal we negotiated using Ethan's unauthorized intelligence. They want an investigation into possible securities fraud. The room went silent. Jesus, Richard breathed. They're going nuclear, Maya said. They're going stupid, Catherine corrected. Securities fraud, that's a massive overreach. They'll never make it stick. They don't have to make it stick, Paul said. They just have to make enough noise that investors get nervous. Stock price drops, board starts asking questions. Arya gets pressure from all sides to settle. I won't settle, Arya said flatly. Even if it costs you the company? Especially then. Ethan watched this unfold with a growing sense of unreality. 24 hours ago, he'd been debating whether to take this job. Now he was at the center of a legal war that could destroy everything. What do I do? He asked. Everyone looked at him. You do your job, Arya said. You keep working. You keep catching what everyone else misses. You show them that you're not just some janitor who got lucky. You're exactly who we say you are. And legally, you cooperate with our attorneys completely. You tell them everything. When you first saw the documents, what you read, what you said to whom and when. No surprises, no hidden details, nothing they can use against us. She paused. And you don't talk to Helix, not Lauren Fisher, not Chen, not anyone. If they approach you, you walk away and call Paul immediately. They're going to dig deeper into my background, Ethan said. Those 6 years. My daughter's mother. The medical debt. Everything I just told Carl. They're going to weaponize all of it. Let them, Catherine said. Truth is a pretty good defense. Is it? Because the truth is I was a broke kid who made terrible choices and spent years running from them. That doesn't exactly scream trustworthy corporate consultant. No, Arya agreed. It screams human being who survived against the odds and learned valuable skills in the process. That's the story we're telling, not the one Helix wants to write. Over the next week, Ethan learned what it meant to be at war. Helix's legal team sent document requests, hundreds of pages demanding everything from his employment history to his travel records, to his daughter's school enrollment. Vance's attorneys pushed back, but some things they had to provide. Ethan spent hours in conference rooms with lawyers, recounting every detail of that night he'd first read the documents, every word of his conversations with Arya, every moment of the negotiation. Did Ms. Vance ever explicitly ask you to look for problems in Helix's proposals? One attorney asked for the third time. No, she asked me to listen during the meeting and tell her if anything seemed wrong. That's it. And you didn't think it was unusual for a CEO to ask a janitor for advice on a $300 million deal? I thought it was insane, but she asked anyway. The attorney made notes. Why do you think she trusted you? Because I was right, and because she was desperate. Meanwhile, the media got hold of the story. Business publications ran headlines. Vance Industries under fire for hiring practices. And Helix Consortium alleges corporate espionage. Online commentators had a field day. Some called Ethan a hero whistleblower. Others called him a fraud. Most just called him a janitor who'd gotten too big for his mop bucket. Sophie noticed. Dad, why are people writing mean things about you on the computer? He'd caught her on his laptop, reading an article that called him unqualified and potentially dangerous to corporate integrity. She was crying. Hey, hey! He pulled her into his lap. Don't read that stuff, okay? But they're saying you're a liar. You're not a liar. No, I'm not. But some people are angry that I'm doing a job they don't think I should have, so they say mean things to make themselves feel better. That's stupid. Yeah, it is. She wiped her eyes. Are you going to lose your job? The question gutted him. I don't know, sweetheart. I don't want you to work at night again. Me neither. That night after Sophie fell asleep, Ethan sat at his wobbly kitchen table and opened his laptop. The comments on the articles were worse than the articles themselves. Anonymous strangers dissecting his life, his choices, his worth. Some defended him. Most didn't. His phone buzzed. Arya, stop reading the comments. How did you know? Because I'm reading them too. It's masochistic. Stop. Hard to ignore when they're calling me a con artist. They called me an incompetent nepotism case when I took over from my mother. I survived. You will too. Did you have a 7-year-old reading articles about how terrible you are? A pause. Then, no, I'm sorry. Is Sophie okay? She's scared. Thinks I'm going to lose my job and will go back to me working nights. You're not going to lose your job. I promise. You can't promise that. If this gets bad enough, then it gets bad. We deal with it together. Ethan stared at the word, together. Like they were actually in this as partners instead of employer and employee. Like he mattered beyond his usefulness. Why are you doing this? He typed. Fighting this hard for someone you barely know? The response took longer this time. Because you were right, and because I'm tired of people like Carl Brenner thinking they can buy or bully their way through anything, and because, another pause, because I know what it's like to be underestimated, to have people assume you didn't earn what you have. You're a CEO. I'm a janitor who got lucky. You're a senior language consultant who saved my company. Stop selling yourself short. Ethan didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. He closed the laptop and went to bed, but sleep was a long time coming. The next day, Vance's legal team filed their response to Helix's complaints. It was aggressive, thorough, and pulled no punches. They argued that Helix's claims were meritless, that Ethan had never had unauthorized access to any documents, that his hiring was based entirely on merit and had nothing to do with the Helix deal. They also filed a countersuit alleging that Helix had engaged in bad faith negotiations by deliberately hiding problematic clauses in multi-language contracts, knowing that most companies wouldn't catch them. We're playing offense now, Richard explained in a meeting. Helix wanted a fight. We're giving them one. Will it work? Ethan asked. Hard to say. But it shifts the narrative. Instead of us defending against accusations of espionage, we're accusing them of fraud. Now they have to defend their negotiation practices. Which were definitely fraudulent, Maya added. We found 3 other deals they've done in the past 18 months with similar issues. Hidden clauses, contradictory translations, the whole playbook. We're submitting all of it as evidence. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, it was too early for that, but hope. Maybe they actually had a chance. Then Chen made his move. It started with an email to Arya, CC-ing the entire executive team, and Helix's legal counsel. Ms. Vance, we've discovered some concerning information about Mr. Cole's time abroad that I believe warrants immediate attention. During his 6-year absence from the United States, he was employed by a consulting firm in Bangkok that has since been implicated in corporate espionage activities. While we have no evidence that Mr. Cole was directly involved, the association raises serious questions about his background and intentions. In the interest of transparency, we thought you should know. Attached was a document, poorly translated but damning enough, showing Ethan's name on a list of contractors for a firm called Pacific Strategic Solutions. Ethan stared at the email in disbelief. I never worked for them, he said. I've never even heard of them. Then why is your name on their contractor list? Paul Hendricks had pulled up additional information on Pacific Strategic Solutions. It wasn't good. The firm had been shut down 5 years ago amid allegations of industrial espionage, bribery, and corporate infiltration. I don't know. I worked dozens of jobs in Bangkok. Translation, tour guiding, teaching English, anything that paid. Maybe one of them contracted through this firm without me knowing. Or maybe... He stopped. Maybe what? Arya asked. Maybe Chen's lying. You think he fabricated this? I think he's desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. Ethan pulled up the document again. This list shows me working for them from March 2015 to August 2016, but I was in Brazil for most of 2015. I can prove that. I have passport stamps, hostel records, photos. Get them, Paul said immediately. Everything. We need to show this is false. Ethan spent the next 12 hours digging through boxes he hadn't opened in years. Old passports with stamps from a dozen countries, receipts from hostels and cheap hotels, photos on his phone from that time, mostly landscapes and street food, but a few with dates and locations visible. He compiled everything into a timeline that clearly showed he couldn't have been working for Pacific Strategic Solutions when Chen claimed he was. It's fabricated. Thus, Vance's head attorney confirmed after reviewing everything. Chen either found someone with the same name or created a false record. Either way, we can disprove it. They sent their response within hours, including Ethan's passport records and a strongly worded accusation that Helix was now engaging in character assassination using falsified documents. Chen's response was swift and vicious. Our sources stand by their information. If Mr. Cole claims he was elsewhere during this time, perhaps he can explain the gaps in his travel history, or the periods where he has no official employment records, or why he sent money to the United States from Bangkok during months he claims to have been in Brazil. Ethan's blood ran cold. I sent money from Bangkok because that's where the wire transfer service was, he explained to the legal team. I was in Brazil, but I had to go through Bangkok to send money home because the rates were better. And I knew someone there who wouldn't charge me fees. It doesn't mean I was working there. Can you prove that? The attorney asked. How? It was 10 years ago. The transfer shop probably doesn't even exist anymore. Then we have a problem, because Chen's creating a narrative that's just plausible enough to raise doubts. The leak started the next day. Anonymous sources told business reporters that Ethan Cole had a shadowy past involving potential espionage work. That his hiring by Vance Industries was suspiciously convenient given the timing of the Helix deal, that he was either a corporate spy or dangerously naive, and either way, he didn't belong anywhere near sensitive negotiations. The stock price dipped, not catastrophically, but enough that the board started making noise. Arya spent an entire afternoon in emergency meetings with investors, reassuring them that the Helix situation was under control. When she emerged, she looked exhausted. They're scared, she told her core team. They see the headlines and the stock price, and they want answers. What did you tell them? Richard asked. The truth, that we hired someone talented who doesn't fit the usual mold. That Helix is scared because we caught them cheating, that we're not backing down. She paused. Some of them accepted it, some didn't. How many didn't? Enough to be a problem if this drags on much longer. Ethan felt the weight of every eye in the room on him. He was the problem, the liability, the janitor who'd somehow become the focal point of a corporate war. He started. Don't, Arya cut him off. Don't say you should resign. Don't say you're not worth it. Just don't. But the board doesn't run this company. I do. And I'm not sacrificing you to make Carl Brenner happy. Even if it costs you everything, especially then. It was the same answer she'd given before. Ethan wanted to believe it, but he could see the cracks forming, the pressure building, the walls closing in. That night, someone threw a rock through his apartment window. Ethan was helping Sophie with homework when the glass shattered. He threw himself over her instinctively, covering her with his body while shards rained down around them. Dad, Sophie was screaming. It's okay, it's okay. He pulled her away from the window, checking her for cuts. She was shaking, but unharmed. Are you hurt? No, what happened? Someone threw something. He spotted the rock on the floor, wrapped in paper. His stomach turned. Stay here. He unfolded the paper. 5 words in block letters. Leave before it gets worse. Ethan called Paul Hendricks, then the police, then Mrs. Chen to come stay with Sophie while he dealt with everything. The police filed a report but admitted they probably wouldn't find who did it. Could be anyone, the officer said. You're in the news. People get worked up. People get threatening, Ethan corrected. That too. After they left, after the window was boarded up and Sophie was finally asleep in Mrs. Chen's apartment, Ethan sat alone in his living room and stared at the message. Leave before it gets worse. He thought about Sophie crying as glass shattered around them, about the fear in her eyes, about how quickly this had escalated from legal maneuvering to actual violence. His phone rang. Arya. Paul told me what happened. Are you and Sophie okay? Physically, yeah. I'm sending security to watch your building tonight. That's not necessary. It's already done. 2 guards. They'll be discreet, but present. She paused. Ethan, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have anticipated they'd go after you directly. It's not your fault. It's whoever threw that rock's fault. Still, if I'd known, you would have done exactly what you're doing now, fighting back. He looked at the boarded window. Arya, maybe they're right. Maybe I should step back before Sophie gets hurt. Did they threaten her specifically? No, but she was there when the window broke. She's terrified. And if this escalates, it won't. We're going to end this. How? By proving that Helix has been running this scam on multiple companies, by showing that their entire business model relies on cheating, by making them the story instead of you. And if that doesn't work? Silence. Then we find another way, but we don't give up. After they hung up, Ethan checked on Sophie through Mrs. Chen's window. She was asleep finally, curled up on the couch with her stuffed rabbit. Safe for now. But for how long? The next morning, Maya called an emergency team meeting. When Ethan arrived, the conference room was packed. Not just the international development team, but people from legal, communications, finance, even some board members. Catherine Vance stood at the head of the table. We found something, she said without preamble. 3 other companies that signed deals with Helix in the past 2 years. All of them had similar issues, hidden clauses, translation discrepancies, contracts that looked good on the surface but were designed to fail. Maya pulled up a presentation. First, Meridian Tech signed a partnership deal in 2024. Within 8 months, they were paying penalty fees that exceeded the value of the partnership. They tried to renegotiate, Helix refused. They had to sell off a division to cover the costs. Second, Frontier Logistics. Similar timeline, hidden modification clauses that gave Helix unilateral control over pricing. They're currently in bankruptcy. Third, Cascade Industries. They caught the problem early like we did, tried to renegotiate, and Helix sued them for breach of contract. The case is still ongoing. Richard leaned forward. So this is a pattern, a business model. Exactly, Catherine said. Helix targets companies that need international partnerships, offers deals that look favorable, then uses language barriers to hide traps. They're counting on companies missing the details until it's too late. And when companies catch them, one of the board members asked, they attack, legally, publicly, personally, whatever it takes to protect their model. Catherine looked at Ethan. You're not the first person they've tried to destroy. You're just the first one who refused to go quietly. The room was silent. We're filing an amended complaint, the head attorney said, alleging a pattern of fraudulent business practices. We're also reaching out to Meridian, Frontier, and Cascade to see if they'll join our case. Will they? Arya asked. Maybe. They're scared. Helix has deep pockets and expensive lawyers. But if we can show strength, show them they're not alone. The attorney shrugged. People find courage when they're not fighting alone. What about the complaints against Vance? And another board member pressed. The espionage allegations, the securities fraud investigation? We're cooperating fully with investigators, but we're also showing them the bigger picture. That Helix's complaints are retaliation for us exposing their fraud. The attorney looked confident. It's going to take time, but we have a strong case. And Mr. Cole? Everyone looked at Ethan. Mr. Cole continues doing his job, Catherine said firmly. He's proven his value. The fact that Helix is attacking him this aggressively just confirms he's a threat to their business model. With respect, Mrs. Vance, the optics are that we stand by our people when they're right. Catherine's voice could have cut glass. We're not sacrificing him to make this easier. Clear? Reluctant nods around the table. After the meeting, Arya pulled Ethan aside. 3 other companies, she said quietly. 3! And those are just the ones we found quickly. There could be more. So this was never about me specifically. I'm just collateral damage in their larger game. You're the one who exposed the game. That makes you dangerous. She paused. The security at your building, they're staying until this is resolved. Arya, non-negotiable. Sophie's safety comes first. He couldn't argue with that. That afternoon, Ethan returned to his actual job. Maya had a new deal to review, a partnership with a shipping consortium in Northern Europe. The documents were in Norwegian, Danish, and Swedish, with English translations that looked clean. Ethan read for 3 hours, cross-referencing between versions, checking definitions, looking for the patterns he'd learned to recognize. Anything? Maya asked. Maybe. This clause about environmental compliance. The Norwegian version says, must meet current standards. The English says, should meet current standards. Must versus should. That's a legal distinction. Big enough to matter? Big enough to cost millions if environmental regulations change, which they will. He pointed to another section. And here, the Danish version defines delivery completion differently than English. It's subtle, but it creates room for disputes. Maya swore in Portuguese. These people learned from Helix, didn't they? Or they're just playing the same game everyone plays when they think they can get away with it. They spent the rest of the day negotiating changes with the consortium's team. It was exhausting technical work that required complete focus. But it was also the first time in days that Ethan felt useful instead of hunted. When he picked up Sophie that evening, she hugged him extra tight. I don't like those men outside our building, she said. They're there to keep us safe, sweetheart. Safe from what? How did he explain this to a 7-year-old? That he'd accidentally become important enough to threaten? That people were angry enough to throw rocks through windows? From people who are angry that Dad's doing a good job, he said finally. That's stupid. People should be happy when someone does a good job. Yeah, they should. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan stood at the boarded-up window and thought about everything that had changed. 3 weeks ago, he'd been invisible, safe in his invisibility. Now he was at the center of a storm that kept getting worse. His phone buzzed, an email from an address he didn't recognize. Mr. Cole, my name is Patricia Chen. No relation to the Chen, you know. I was the CFO of Meridian Tech when we signed our deal with Helix. I read about your case. I want to help. If you're willing to talk, I have information that might be useful. Ethan forwarded it to Paul Hendricks with a note. Real or trap? Paul's response came back in minutes. Patricia Chen is real. Former Meridian CFO, forced out during their financial collapse. Could be legitimate. I'll vet her. Don't respond yet. But Ethan was already thinking about what Patricia might know, what other companies knew, how many people had been hurt by Helix's games and were too scared or broken to fight back. Maybe Arya was right. Maybe they could end this, or maybe they were just making themselves bigger targets. Either way, there was no going back now. Patricia Chen turned out to be real, vetted, and absolutely furious. She met Ethan and Paul Hendricks 3 days later in a conference room that Paul had swept for listening devices. Patricia was in her mid-50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back tight and eyes that had seen too much corporate betrayal to be surprised by anything anymore. Helix destroyed my company, she said without preamble. And they did it so smoothly that most people still think it was our fault. Poor management, bad strategic decisions. Nobody looked at the contracts closely enough to see we'd been set up from day one. She spread documents across the table. Emails, contract drafts, internal memos from Meridian Tech's final months. We signed with Helix in March 2024. By November, we were hemorrhaging money from penalty fees we didn't even know existed. I brought it to our CEO, showed him the discrepancies between the Chinese and English versions. He wanted to fight. Our board wanted to settle. Her voice went flat. The board won. We paid Helix $40 million to exit the contract early. 6 months later, we were bankrupt. I was blamed for not catching the problem sooner. But you did catch them, Ethan said. Too late. And I didn't have proof they were intentional, just suspicions. She looked at him. You have proof. You caught them in real time, showed everyone exactly what they were doing. That's why they're coming after you so hard. They're doing a pretty good job of it. They're scared. I've never seen Carl Brenner scared before. Patricia pulled out another document. This is a list of every company I know Helix has targeted in the past 5 years. Some settled quietly. Some went under. A few are still fighting in courts. None of them have what you have, a smoking gun and a company willing to back you publicly. Paul took the list. There were 17 names. You documented all of this? After Meridian collapsed, I had time. And anger, lots of anger. She met Ethan's eyes. I want to testify. If you go to trial, if you need someone to establish a pattern of behavior, I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. They'll come after you, Ethan warned. They already destroyed my career. What else can they take? After she left, Paul and Ethan sat in silence. 17 companies, Paul finally said, that we know about. There could be more. How did they get away with it for so long? Because most companies can't afford to fight. They settle, sign NDAs, move on. And the ones that do fight usually lose because Helix has better lawyers and deeper pockets. He paused. But if we can get even 3 or 4 of these companies to join our case, then it becomes a pattern, not just us making accusations. Exactly. Over the next 2 weeks, Vance's legal team reached out to every company on Patricia's list. Most refused to talk, bound by settlement agreements or too afraid of retaliation. But 3 agreed to share information confidentially. And 2, Cascade Industries and a software company called Next Gen Solutions, agreed to join Vance's lawsuit as co-plaintiffs. The amended complaint they filed was devastating. It laid out 5 years of fraudulent contracts, showed the pattern of targeting companies in financial need, documented the language tricks Helix used in over a dozen deals. The media picked it up immediately. This changes everything, Richard said, reading the coverage. We're not the company with the suspicious janitor anymore. We're the company exposing systemic fraud. Helix will escalate, Maya predicted. She was right. 2 days after the amended filing, Chen published an op-ed in a major business journal. It was titled, "The Danger of Desperate Companies Making Desperate Hires," and it tore into Ethan with surgical precision. Vance Industries wants you to believe they're heroes exposing corporate malfeasance. In reality, they're a struggling company that hired an unqualified individual with a questionable past, then built a legal strategy around defending that poor decision. Mr. Cole may believe he's helping, but he's actually the unwitting pawn in a game of corporate chess he doesn't understand. His background raises serious questions. 6 years abroad with minimal documentation. Employment gaps. Associations with firms later implicated in espionage. And yet Vance Industries expects us to trust him with multi-million-dollar negotiations? This isn't about me or Helix. It's about standards. It's about protecting the integrity of international business. It's about ensuring that companies operate with qualified professionals, not maintenance workers who happen to read some documents they weren't supposed to access. Ethan read it twice, each time feeling smaller. It's a hit piece, Arya said when he called her. Ignore it. Kind of hard to ignore when he's calling me an unwitting pawn. You're not unwitting, and you're definitely not a pawn. Arya, he's not completely wrong. I don't have the credentials. I don't have the background. I'm exactly what he says I am, a janitor who got lucky. Stop. You're a person who learned valuable skills through experience. That's not luck. That's work. The board doesn't see it that way. I heard 2 of them talking yesterday. They think I'm a liability. You're too stubborn to cut loose. Silence on the other end. Then, which board members? Does it matter? Yes. Arya. Does it matter because I'm going to have a conversation with them about loyalty and vision and what this company actually stands for? Her voice was steel. You're not a liability, Ethan. You're the reason we're still standing, and if they can't see that, they don't belong on my board. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. You're going to get yourself fired defending me. Then I'll get fired doing the right thing. I can live with that. After they hung up, Ethan sat at his wobbly kitchen table and thought about the past month. how his life had exploded in ways he never could have predicted, how Sophie now had nightmares about broken glass, how he'd gone from invisible to infamous in the span of a few meetings. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Cole, this is James Reeves, former CEO of Cascade Industries. I read what Chen wrote about you. Don't let him get in your head. I made the mistake of backing down when Helix came after us. Worst decision I ever made. Stand your ground. Some of us are counting on you." Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Then he forwarded it to Arya without comment. Her response came back immediately. "See? You're not alone." The preliminary hearing happened on a Tuesday morning in federal court. Ethan sat in the gallery behind Vance's legal team, watching lawyers argue about jurisdiction and standing and whether the case should be dismissed before trial. Helix's attorneys were smooth, expensive, confident. They argued that Vance's claims were meritless, that the contracts in question were standard practice, that any discrepancies between translations were unintentional errors, not fraud. Furthermore, the lead attorney said, the central figure in Vance's allegations is a man with no credentials, no professional background in international law, and a history that includes significant gaps and questionable associations. Basing a fraud claim on his interpretations is like building a house on sand. Vance's attorney stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Cole's qualifications are irrelevant to the facts. The documents speak for themselves. We have multiple contracts showing systematic discrepancies between language versions, all favoring Helix Consortium. We have testimony from executives at 3 separate companies describing identical patterns. This isn't about one man's interpretation. It's about documented evidence of fraudulent business practices. Evidence that was obtained when Mr. Cole, then employed as a janitor, read confidential documents he had no authorization to access," Helix's attorney countered. "He was cleaning a conference room. The documents were left on a table. There was no breach of security, no unauthorized access, no corporate espionage. Just an employee who noticed something wrong and reported it." The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and sharper questions, looked between both sides. "I'm going to allow discovery to proceed. Helix's motion to dismiss is denied, but I want both parties to understand this court will not tolerate games. No more character assassination in the press. No more anonymous threats. You will conduct yourselves professionally, or you will answer to me. Clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," both sides said in unison. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Ethan stayed back while Arya and the legal team gave statements, but one reporter recognized him and pushed through the crowd. "Mr. Cole, do you have any response to Chen's op-ed calling you unqualified?" "No comment." "Are you concerned that your background will undermine Vance's case?" "I'm concerned about telling the truth, that's all." "Some people are calling you a whistleblower. Others say you're a fraud. Which is it?" Ethan looked directly at the camera. "I'm someone who saw something wrong and spoke up. Make of that what you will." He walked away before they could ask more questions. That night, Sophie asked him if he was a hero. "Where did you hear that word?" "Mrs. Chen said people on TV are calling you a hero. Are you?" Ethan thought about it. "No, sweetheart, heroes do brave things on purpose. I just stumbled into something and tried not to mess it up too badly." "That sounds brave to me." "Yeah, well, you're biased." She grinned. "Maybe. But I'm right too." Over the following weeks, discovery turned into a war of attrition. Both sides demanded documents, depositions, records. Ethan was deposed for 6 hours by Helix's attorneys, who tried every angle to discredit him. They asked about his travels, his finances, his daughter's mother, every gap in his employment history. "Where exactly were you in April 2016? One attorney asked. "Vietnam, working at a hostel in Dalat. Can you prove that?" "I have photos, hostel records if they still exist, stamps in my passport. But no formal employment documentation?" "It was a cash job at a hostel. They don't exactly file W-2s. Convenient. Not really. Would have made my life easier if they had." The attorney moved on to the next question, but Ethan could see the strategy. They were building a portrait of someone unreliable, undocumented, impossible to verify. Someone a jury wouldn't trust. But Vance's team was building their own portrait. They deposed Carl Brenner, who was polished and careful, and claimed every discrepancy was an honest mistake. They deposed Yuki Tanaka, who was less careful and let slip that Helix's contract templates were designed to be flexible across languages. They deposed the executives from Cascade and NextGen, who described in painful detail how their companies had been systematically bled dry. "We're winning on the merits," Vance's lead attorney told Arya after one particularly brutal deposition. "But trials aren't just about merit, they're about narrative. And Helix has a good one. The scrappy David fighting against corporate Goliath who hired a shady character to justify breaking a contract." "Then we changed the narrative," Catherine Vance said. She'd been sitting in on more meetings lately, and Ethan suspected Arya had called her in as reinforcement. "We make this about patterns, not personalities. We make it about protecting other companies, not just defending ourselves." "How?" Richard asked. "By going public with everything. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence showing what Helix has done. We release it all and let the court of public opinion judge them first." "That's risky," the attorney warned. "Could bias the jury pool. Could also pressure Helix into settling," Maya pointed out. They argued for another hour before Arya made the call. "We go public. Controlled release through legitimate business press. Full transparency." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Business journals ran detailed analyses of Helix's contracts, showing side-by-side comparisons of language discrepancies. Corporate lawyers started calling their own clients, warning them to review any deals with Helix. Stock prices shifted. Vance's went up, Helix's went down, and companies started coming forward. Not just the ones Patricia had identified, but others. Smaller firms that had been afraid to speak up. Regional businesses that thought they were alone. Within a week, Vance's legal team had statements from 12 different companies describing similar problems with Helix contracts. Carl Brenner called for a meeting. They met in a neutral conference room at a hotel downtown. Carl brought Yuki and 3 attorneys. Arya brought Catherine, Richard, and Ethan. No one shook hands. "This has gotten out of control," Carl said, cutting straight to business. "Your media campaign has damaged Helix's reputation significantly." "Your fraud damaged 12 companies significantly," Catherine replied. "We're just balancing the scales." "We dispute that characterization entirely. But in the interest of resolving this situation," Carl paused, clearly hating every word, "Helix is prepared to offer a settlement." "I'm listening," Arya said. "We'll restructure our existing contract with Vance Industries. Clean language, transparent terms, fair penalties. We'll also establish a compensation fund for the other companies who've claimed damages." He named a figure that made Richard's eyebrows shoot up. "In exchange, Vance drops all legal claims and refrains from further public statements about Helix's business practices." "What about the companies joining our lawsuit?" Arya asked. "They'd be included in the compensation fund, provided they also agree to confidentiality." Arya looked at Catherine, who gave the slightest shake of her head, then at Ethan, who kept his face carefully neutral. "No," Arya said. Carl's expression hardened. "That's a very generous offer." "It's hush money. You're asking us to take a payout and let you continue doing business the same way you always have, just with other companies, other victims." "We're not admitting to any wrongdoing." "Of course not. You never do." Arya leaned forward. "Here's my counteroffer. You admit that your contracts contained intentional discrepancies designed to favor Helix. You compensate every company on our list, not just the ones suing, all of them. You implement third-party audits of all future contracts to ensure translation accuracy. And you fire Chen." Yuki actually laughed. "You can't be serious." "Completely serious. You've been running a scam for years. Time to pay for it." "If we admit fault, we'll be sued by dozens of other companies," one of Helix's attorneys said. "Probably," Catherine agreed. "Consequences of your actions, I believe." Carl stood. "Then we'll see you in court. And when we win, and we will win, Vance Industries will be responsible for our legal fees plus damages. That'll bankrupt you." "Maybe," Arya said calmly, "but at least we'll be able to look ourselves in the mirror." They left. Yuki was already on her phone, probably calling their PR team. Carl looked like he wanted to flip the table. but it was the brief moment when his eyes met Ethan's that stuck. There was no anger there, just cold calculation. The look of someone planning their next move. "That went well," Richard said dryly once they were alone. "They'll increase the settlement offer," one of Vance's attorneys predicted. "They're more worried than they're letting on." But Ethan was thinking about Carl's expression, about how someone that calculating didn't just give up because one offer was refused. He was right to worry. 2 nights later, someone leaked Ethan's sealed deposition testimony to a blogger who specialized in corporate gossip. The testimony included every question about his past, every gap in his story, every moment where he couldn't provide documentation. The blogger framed it as Vance's star witness can't account for years of his life. What's he hiding? The comments section exploded. Conspiracy theories, accusations, people convinced Ethan was either a corporate spy, a con artist, or worse. Someone found photos he'd posted online years ago, mostly landscapes and street food, and started analyzing them for hidden clues about his real activities. "They're trying to destroy your credibility before trial," Paul said, reviewing the damage. "Make you seem so unreliable that a jury won't trust anything you say." "Is it working?" "On some people, yeah. But we expected this. We have countermeasures." The countermeasures included Vance's PR team placing stories about Ethan's actual life. Interviews with people who'd known him during his travels, a hostel owner in Bangkok who remembered him fixing plumbing for reduced rent, a teacher in Brazil who'd hired him to tutor English, a family in Morocco who'd taken him in when he was sick. Small stories, human stories, that painted a picture far different from the shadowy figure Helix was trying to create. Sophie saw some of the coverage. She asked why people were saying mean things about pictures of food Dad took. "Because they don't understand," Ethan said, "and people fear what they don't understand." "That's really stupid." "Yeah, kiddo, it is." But the pressure was working. Ethan could feel it wearing on him. The constant scrutiny, the attacks, the knowledge that everything he said or did was being recorded and analyzed and twisted. He started having trouble sleeping, started snapping at people who didn't deserve it, started wondering if Arya's faith in him was misplaced. She noticed. "Walk with me," she said one afternoon, finding him staring at his computer screen without actually seeing it. They took the elevator down and walked through the city streets, 2 people in business clothes among thousands of others, anonymous in the crowd. "You're burning out," Arya said. "I'm fine." "You're not. I've seen burnout. Hell, I've experienced it, and you're showing all the signs." "What do you want me to do? Quit right before trial?" "I want you to remember why we're doing this." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "It's not about winning. It's not about proving Helix wrong or protecting Vance Industries or making you look credible. It's about stopping them from doing to other companies what they tried to do to us. That's the only thing that matters." Easy to say when you're not the one being called a fraud every day. "You think I'm not being attacked? Half the business press thinks I'm a fool for trusting you. My board thinks I'm risking everything to protect my ego. I get emails daily calling me naive, reckless, unfit to run a company." She paused. "But I'm still here. Because some fights are worth having even if you lose. And if we do lose, if the jury decides I'm just some janitor who got lucky and Helix was legitimately wronged, then we lose. But we'll have tried. And every company that's come forward because of us, every business that's now reviewing their Helix contracts, every executive who's learned to read the fine print in multiple languages, that's worth something. That changes things." Ethan looked at her. This woman who'd given him a chance when nobody else would, who'd stood by him through weeks of attacks, who was risking her entire company on the belief that he was worth defending. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "Yes, you can. Because you already have been. Every day for a month." "That's different. That was reacting. The trial is more of the same, just in a courtroom." She started walking again. "Ethan, I'm not going to lie to you. The trial is going to be brutal. They're going to question everything about you. They're going to make you look unreliable and suspicious and possibly criminal. And all you can do is tell the truth and trust that it's enough." "What if it's not?" "Then it's not. But at least you'll know you didn't back down." They walked another block in silence. Then Ethan said, Sophie asked me yesterday if I'm scared. What did you tell her? The truth, that I'm terrified. He paused. She said that's okay, because brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. Arya smiled. Your daughter is wise. She's 7. Wisdom doesn't have an age requirement. The trial started on a cold morning in January. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, business executives, people from the companies Helix had damaged, curious observers who'd followed the case online. Ethan sat at the plaintiff's table between Arya and Vance's lead attorney, trying to look confident and mostly just trying not to throw up. The jury filed in. 12 people who would decide whether Ethan was a whistleblower or a fraud, whether Vance was a victim or a vindictive corporation, whether Helix had committed systematic fraud or just made honest mistakes. Opening statements laid out the competing narratives. Vance's attorney painted a picture of deliberate deception spanning years. Helix's attorney painted Vance as a struggling company that hired an unqualified nobody, then built a legal strategy around justifying that mistake when it backfired. They want you to believe that a man with no formal education, no credentials, and years of undocumented foreign travel stumbled onto a massive fraud that trained experts missed. Helix's attorney said, gesturing dismissively at Ethan. But the simpler explanation is that Mr. Cole misunderstood contracts he wasn't qualified to interpret, and Vance Industries decided to blame Helix rather than admit their own error. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses from both sides, expert testimony about translation accuracy and international contract law, documents projected on screens, highlighted, debated. Patricia Chen took the stand and described how Helix had destroyed Meridian Tech. James Reeves from Cascade testified about similar experiences. Carl Brenner defended his company's practices with smooth confidence. And then it was Ethan's turn. Helix's attorney spent 2 full days cross-examining him, every gap in his employment history, every period where he couldn't provide documentation, the sealed deposition testimony, read aloud to make him seem evasive, photos from his travels, questioned and analyzed. Even Sophie's mother's medical bills, brought up to suggest Ethan was motivated by debt rather than truth. Mr. Cole, isn't it true that you saw those Helix documents as an opportunity? A way to make yourself valuable to Vance Industries? No. You weren't thinking about job security, better pay, getting out of debt? I was thinking that what I'd read was wrong and someone needed to know about it. How convenient. And Vance Industries just happened to offer you a job afterward? They offered me a job because I was good at what I did. What you did was read confidential documents you had no authorization to access. I read papers left on a table in a room I was assigned to clean, and you expect this jury to believe that was innocent curiosity? I expect this jury to look at the evidence. The documents speak for themselves. It went on like that for hours. Ethan tried to stay calm, stay honest, not take the bait when the attorney tried to make him angry. But by the end of day 2 on the stand, he was exhausted and raw and ready to be done. Vance's attorney did redirect, giving Ethan a chance to explain his background more fully, to talk about the skills he'd learned through necessity, to describe how he'd recognized the patterns in Helix's contracts because he'd seen similar tricks in his travels. Some of us learn in classrooms, Ethan said. Some of us learn by surviving. Neither one is inherently better. They're just different. The jury's faces were unreadable. Closing arguments framed everything one final time. Then the jury was sent to deliberate. The wait was excruciating. Hours stretched into days. The jury asked for specific documents to review, asked to hear certain testimony read back, sent notes with questions that lawyers on both sides tried to interpret like tea leaves. Ethan couldn't work, couldn't focus, could barely eat. He spent his evenings with Sophie, trying to pretend everything was normal while his entire future hung in the balance. When will we know? Sophie asked on day 3 of deliberations. When the jury decides. What if they decide wrong? Then we deal with it. You always say that because it's always true. On the afternoon of day 4, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled again. Same faces, same tension, but multiplied now. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. The jury filed in, their faces carefully neutral. The forewoman stood when asked if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." Ethan's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it. Arya's hand found his under the table, squeezed once. "On the charge of fraudulent business practices," the forewoman read, "we find in favor of the plaintiff, Vance Industries." The courtroom erupted, reporters scrambling for their phones. Someone on Helix's side swearing. Catherine Vance's rare smile. The judge gavelled for order. "Continue." "Ishi pasashi." On the charge of intentional contract manipulation, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the charge of corporate espionage against Ethan Cole, we find in favor of the defendant, Mr. Cole. We find that Helix Consortium engaged in systematic fraudulent practices and award damages to be determined by the court. More chaos. The judge was talking about scheduling for the damages phase, but Ethan couldn't focus. He felt Arya hugging him, heard Maya laughing, saw Richard actually smiling for once. They'd won. Against impossible odds, against better-funded opponents, against every doubt and attack and threat, they'd won. Outside the courthouse, cameras and questions. Arya gave a statement about justice and corporate responsibility. Ethan stayed quiet, letting her have the moment, but one reporter pushed through and got a microphone in his face. "Mr. Cole, how does it feel to be vindicated?" Ethan thought about the past months, the fear, the doubt, the nights wondering if he'd destroyed his life and Sophie's for nothing. "It feels like the truth mattered," he said simply. "What's next for you?" He looked at Arya, who was still answering questions, at Catherine, who gave him a small nod, at the crowd of people who'd supported him through everything. "I'm going to keep doing my job, and I'm going to have dinner with my daughter." The damages phase took another 3 weeks, but it was anticlimactic after the verdict. The court ordered Helix to pay Vance Industries substantial damages, plus additional compensation to Cascade, NextGen, and the other companies that had joined the case. More importantly, the verdict opened the floodgates. Within a month, 7 more companies filed lawsuits against Helix for similar practices. Carl Brenner resigned. Chen disappeared from public view. Helix Consortium's stock plummeted as investors fled. The company wouldn't survive the year. For Ethan, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. The security guards left his building. The media moved on to new scandals. His daughter stopped having nightmares about broken glass. But everything had changed in ways both large and small. Vance Industries promoted him to Director of International Contract Compliance, with a team of 3 people reporting to him. Companies started calling, asking if he'd review their deals. Business schools invited him to speak about practical linguistics versus academic training. "You're famous," Sophie said, finding an article that called him a corporate watchdog. "I'm temporarily interesting," Ethan corrected. "There's a difference." "Are you happy, though?" He thought about it, about the work he was doing, meaningful work that protected companies from the kind of predatory practices Helix had perfected, about coming home for dinner every night, about Sophie thriving now that he was actually present in her life. "Yeah, kiddo, I'm happy." 6 months after the trial, Arya called him into her office. "I have a proposition," she said. "Multiple companies have approached me about creating a consulting firm specifically for contract review across languages, a place where businesses can send their international deals to be vetted by people who actually understand the nuances. That's a good idea. I want you to run it." Ethan stared at her. "What? A subsidiary of Vance Industries, you'd be CEO, build your own team, set your own standards, help other companies avoid what we went through. Arya, I've been doing this job for 6 months. I'm not qualified to—" "Stop. You're the most qualified person I know for this. You've proven it." She leaned forward. "Besides, qualification isn't just about credentials. It's about being right when it matters. You've done that repeatedly." "I don't know the first thing about running a company." "You'll learn, same way you learned everything else, by doing it." Ethan looked out her window at the city below, thought about all the companies out there, signing deals they didn't fully understand, trusting translations that might not be accurate, vulnerable to the same games Helix had played. "I'd want Patricia Chen on the team. he said finally. "And I'd want to hire people like me, people who learned languages the hard way, who understand how the real world works, not just what textbooks say." Done. "And I'd need flexibility for Sophie. She comes first, always." "Understood." "Then yeah, okay, let's do it." They shook hands, and Ethan left her office feeling like he'd just agreed to jump off another cliff. But this time he wasn't terrified. He was ready. The firm launched 3 months later. Ethan hired Patricia as his COO, brought in a translator from Vietnam who'd worked in markets his whole life, a woman from Brazil who'd learned German while working in factories, a former refugee from Syria who spoke 5 languages fluently and understood contract law from living through broken deals. They weren't the most credentialed team, but they were effective. Within the first year, they reviewed over 200 international contracts and caught problems in 70% of them. Companies started calling proactively, wanting their deals vetted before signing. Sophie was 9 when Ethan took her to the office for the first time. She looked around at the small team working together at the whiteboard covered in notes in multiple languages, at her father's name on the door. "You did all this?" she asked. "We did all this. Lots of people helped. But you started it because you saw something wrong and said something." "Yeah, pretty much." She hugged him tight. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I'm proud of you too, sweetheart." That night, Ethan stood at his apartment window, new apartment, no wobbling table, glass intact, and looked out at the city. Same millions of lights, same endless stories. But he was no longer invisible among them. He'd learned something important through all of this. That qualification wasn't just about degrees or credentials or the right background. It was about being willing to see what others missed and having the courage to speak up about it. It was about doing the work, learning the skills, earning the trust. He'd also learned that invisibility, while safe, came at a cost. Sophie deserved a father who was present. He deserved work that mattered. And sometimes the scariest thing, being seen, being vulnerable, being willing to fail publicly, was also the thing that led to something better. His phone buzzed. "Aria. Board meeting tomorrow. They want an update on the consulting firm's Q3 numbers. They're good. We're profitable already." "I know. I've seen the reports. Congratulations. By the way, you built something real. We built something real. None of this happens without you taking a chance on a janitor. Senior language consultant." "We've been over this." Ethan smiled. "Right. My mistake." He set down the phone and checked on Sophie one more time. She was asleep, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, homework done and laid out for morning. 9 years old now and thriving in ways he'd once thought impossible. Tomorrow, he'd give his presentation to the board. Next week, he had 3 new contracts to review. Next month, he was speaking at a conference about practical language acquisition. But tonight, he was just a father standing in his daughter's doorway, grateful for second chances and the people brave enough to offer them. He'd been invisible once, been the person nobody saw, nobody asked, nobody considered. Not anymore. And as he turned off the lights and headed to bed, Ethan Cole understood that the most important qualification anyone could have wasn't written on a resume. It was the willingness to see what needed to be seen, to speak what needed to be spoken, and to stand firm when the world tried to make you disappear. Everything else was just details.